The Tale of Mushkal-Gusha. Traditional tales were felt, in the 18th century, to be an affront to the rational mind, as the illustrious Iona and Peter Opie remind us in the classic fairy tales of 1974. Nowadays, of course, the work of psychologists makes people more open-minded, sometimes even to the point of agreeing with the famous folklorist Joseph Campbell that the folk tale is the primer of the picture language of the soul. Never having been through a phase of believing in the complete sovereignty of the intellect at the expense of other sides of humanity, people in the Middle East have for long regarded certain traditional stories as having a real function and effect on the mind and on the community. Such a tale is that which is sometimes called the tale of Mushkal-Gusha, the remover of all difficulties. It is known in both major and minor communities in India and Pakistan, in Central Asia and Iran, in the Near East and even in Africa and the Yemens. It is believed that if this story is recited on Thursday nights, it will, in some inexplicable way, help the work of the mysterious Mushkal-Gusha, friend of man. Once upon a time, not 1,000 miles from here, there lived a poor old woodcutter who was a widower and his little daughter. Every day he used to go into the mountains to cut firewood, which he brought home and tied into bundles. Then he used to have breakfast and walk into the nearest town, where he would sell his wood and rest for a time before returning home. One day, when he reached home very late, the girl said to him, "Father, I sometimes wish that we could have some nicer food and more and different kinds of things to eat." "Very well, my child," said the old man. "Tomorrow I shall get up much earlier than I usually do. I shall go further into the mountains where there is more wood, and I shall bring back a much larger quantity than usual. I will get home earlier, and I will be able to bundle the wood sooner, and I will go into town and sell it so that we can have more money, and I shall bring you back all kinds of nice things to eat." The next morning the woodcutter rose before dawn and went into the mountains. He worked very hard cutting wood and trimming it and made it into a huge bundle which he carried on his back to his little house. When he got home it was still very early. He put his load of wood down and knocked on the door, saying, "Daughter, daughter, open the door, for I am hungry and thirsty, and I need a meal before I go to market." But the door was locked. The woodcutter was so tired that he lay down and was soon fast asleep beside his bundle. The little girl, having forgotten all about their conversation the night before, was fast asleep in bed. When he woke up a few hours later, the sun was high. The woodcutter knocked on the door again and said, "Daughter, daughter, come quickly. I must have a little food and go to market to sell the wood, for it is already much later than my usual time of starting." But having forgotten all about the conversation, the little girl had meanwhile got up, tidied the house, and gone out for a walk. She had locked the door, assuming, in her forgetfulness, that her father was still in the town. So the woodcutter thought to himself, "It is now rather late to go into the town. I will therefore return to the mountains and cut another bundle of wood, which I will bring home, and tomorrow I will take a double load to market." All that day the old man toiled in the mountains, cutting wood and shaping the branches. When he got home with the wood on his shoulders, it was evening. He put down his burden behind the house, knocked on the door, and said, "Daughter, daughter, open the door, for I am tired and I have eaten nothing all day. I have a double bundle of wood which I hope to take to market tomorrow. Tonight I must sleep well so that I will be strong." But there was no answer, for the little girl, when she came home, had felt very sleepy, and had made a meal for herself and gone to bed. She had been rather worried at first that her father was not home, but she decided that he must have arranged to stay in town overnight. Once again the woodcutter, finding that he could not get into the house, tired, hungry, and thirsty, lay down by his bundles of wood, and fell fast asleep. He could not keep awake, although he was fearful for what might have happened to the little girl. Now the woodcutter, because he was so cold and hungry and tired, woke very, very early the next morning, before it was even light. He sat up and looked around, but he could not see anything. And then a strange thing happened. The woodcutter thought he heard a voice saying, "Hurry, hurry, leave your wood and come this way. If you need enough and you want little enough, you shall have delicious food." The woodcutter stood up and walked in the direction of the voice. And he walked, but he found nothing. By now he was colder and hungrier and more tired than ever, and he was lost. He had been full of hope, but that did not seem to have helped him. Now he felt sad, and he wanted to cry. But he realized that crying would not help him either, so he lay down and fell asleep. Quite soon he woke up again. It was too cold, and he was too hungry to sleep. So he decided to tell himself, as if in a story, everything that had happened to him since his little daughter had first said that she wanted a different kind of food. As soon as he had finished his story, he thought he heard another voice saying, somewhere above him, out of the dawn, "Old man, what are you doing sitting there?" "I am telling myself my own story," said the woodcutter. "And what is that?" said the voice. The old man repeated his tale. "Very well," said the voice. And then it told the old woodcutter to close his eyes and to mount, as it were, a step. "But I do not see any step," said the old man. "Never mind, but do as I say," said the voice. The old man did as he was told. As soon as he had closed his eyes, he found that he was standing up, and as he raised his right foot, he felt that there was something like a step under it. He started to ascend what seemed to be a staircase. Suddenly the whole flight of steps started to move very fast, and the voice said, "Do not open your eyes until I tell you to do so." In a very short time, the voice told the old man to open his eyes. When he did, he found that he was in a place which looked rather like a desert, with the sun beating down on him. He was surrounded by masses and masses of pebbles, pebbles of all colours, red, green, blue, and white. But he seemed to be alone. He looked all around him and could not see anyone, but the voice started to speak again. "Take up as many of these stones as you can," said the voice. "Then close your eyes and walk down the steps once more." The woodcutter did as he was told, and he found himself, when he opened his eyes again at the voice's bidding, standing before the door of his own house. He knocked at the door, and his little daughter answered it. She asked him where he had been, and he told her, although she could hardly understand what he was saying, it all sounded so confusing. They went into the house, and the little girl and her father shared the last food which they had, which was a handful of dried dates. When they had finished, the old man thought that he heard a voice speaking to him again, a voice just like the other one which had told him to climb the stairs. The voice said, "Although you may not know it yet, you have been saved by Mushkal-Gusha. Remember that Mushkal-Gusha is always here. Make sure that every Thursday night you eat some dates and give some to any needy person, and tell the story of Mushkal-Gusha. Or give a gift in the name of Mushkal-Gusha to someone who will help the needy. Make sure that the story of Mushkal-Gusha is never, never forgotten. If you do this, and if this is done by those to whom you tell the story, the people who are in real need will always find their way." The woodcutter put all the stones which he had brought back from the desert in a corner of his little house. They looked very much like ordinary stones, and he did not know what to do with them. The next day he took 2 enormous bundles of wood to market and sold them easily for a high price. When he got home he took his daughter all sorts of delicious kinds of food, which she had never tasted before. And when they had eaten it, the old woodcutter said, "Now I am going to tell you the whole story of Mushkal-Gusha. Mushkal-Gusha is the remover of all difficulties. Our difficulties have been removed through Mushkal-Gusha, and we must always remember it." For nearly a week after that, the old man carried on as usual. He went into the mountains, brought back wood, had a meal, took the wood to market and sold it. He always found a buyer without difficulty. Now the next Thursday came, and, as is the way of men, the woodcutter forgot to repeat the tale of Mushkal-Gusha. Late that evening, in the house of the woodcutter's neighbours, the fire had gone out. The neighbours had nothing with which to relight the fire, and they went to the house of the woodcutter. They said, "Neighbour, neighbour, please give us a light from those wonderful lamps of yours which we see shining through the window." "What lamps?" said the woodcutter. "Come outside," said the neighbours, "and see what we mean." So the woodcutter went outside, and then he saw, sure enough, all kinds of brilliant lights shining through the window from the inside. He went back to the house and saw that the light was streaming from the pile of pebbles which he had put in the corner. But the rays of light were cold, and it was not possible to use them to light a fire. So he went out to the neighbours and said, "Neighbours, I am sorry, I have no fire." And he banged the door in their faces. They were annoyed and confused, and went back to their house, muttering. They leave our story here. The woodcutter and his daughter quickly covered up the brilliant lights with every piece of cloth they could find, for fear that anyone would see what a treasure they had. The next morning, when they uncovered the stones, they discovered that they were precious, luminous gems. They took the jewels, one by one, to neighbouring towns, where they sold them for a huge price. Now the woodcutter decided to build for himself and for his daughter a wonderful palace. They chose a site just opposite the castle of the king of their country. In a very short time, a marvellous building had come into being. Now that particular king had a beautiful daughter, and one day when she got up in the morning, she saw a sort of fairy tale castle just opposite her father's, and she was amazed. She asked her servants, "Who has built this castle? What right have these people to do such a thing so near to our home?" The servants went away and made enquiries, and they came back and told the story, as far as they could collect it, to the princess. The princess called for the little daughter of the woodcutter, for she was very angry with her. But when the two girls met and talked, they soon became fast friends. They started to meet every day, and went to swim and play in the stream which had been made for the princess by her father. A few days after they first met, the princess took off a beautiful and valuable necklace and hung it up on a tree just beside the stream. She forgot to take it down when they came out of the water, and when she got home she thought it must have been lost. The princess thought a little, and then decided that the daughter of the woodcutter had stolen her necklace. So she told her father, and he had the woodcutter arrested, and confiscated the castle and declared forfeit everything that the woodcutter had. The old man was thrown into prison, and the daughter was put into an orphanage. As was the custom in that country, after a period of time the woodcutter was taken from the dungeon and put in the public square, chained to a post with a sign around his neck. On the sign was written, "This is what happens to those who steal from kings." At first people gathered around him and jeered and threw things at him. He was most unhappy. But quite soon, as is the way of men, Everyone became used to the sight of the old man sitting there by his post, and took very little notice of him. Sometimes people threw him scraps of food, sometimes they did not. One day he overheard somebody saying that it was Thursday afternoon. Suddenly the thought came into his mind that it would soon be the evening of Mushkal-Gusha, the remover of all difficulties, and that he had forgotten to commemorate him for so many days. No sooner had this thought come into his head than a charitable man, passing by, threw him a tiny coin. The woodcutter called out, "Generous friend, you have given me money which is of no use to me. If, however, your kindness could extend to buying 1 or 2 dates and coming and sitting and eating them with me, I would be eternally grateful to you." The other man went and bought a few dates, and they sat and ate them together. When they had finished, the woodcutter told the other man the story of Mushkal-Gusha. "I think you must be mad," said the generous man. But he was a kindly person who himself had many difficulties. When he arrived home after this incident, he found that all his problems had disappeared. And that made him start to think a great deal about Mushkal-Gusha. But he leaves our story here. The very next morning the princess went back to her bathing place. As she was about to go into the water, she saw what looked like her necklace down at the bottom of the stream. As she was going to dive in to try to get it back, she happened to sneeze. Her head went up, and she saw that what she had thought was the necklace was only its reflection in the water. It was hanging on the bough of the tree where she had left it such a long time before. Taking the necklace down, the princess ran excitedly to her father and told him what had happened. The king gave orders for the woodcutter to be released and given a public apology. The little girl was brought back from the orphanage, and everyone lived happily ever after. These are some of the incidents in the story of Mushkal-Gusha. It is a very long tale, and it is never ended. It has many forms. Some of them are not even called the story of Mushkal-Gusha at all, so people do not recognize it. But it is because of Mushkal-Gusha that his story, in whatever form, is remembered by somebody, somewhere in the world, day and night, wherever there are people. As his story had always been recited, so it will always continue to be told. The Food of Paradise. What does a folk tale really mean? Scholars and others take them to pieces. Ideologues look for those which will support their beliefs about tales. Literary people often use them as the basis for their own works. Folk tales are recited in many cultures by professional, or at any rate highly expert specialists, and these are sometimes only superannuated and toothless grandmothers. In spite of the enormous amount of work done on the collection, analysis, and study of tales, how many collectors have troubled themselves to ask the reciters themselves, the experts, what the tale is supposed to mean, or what effect it is intended to have? I asked a Central Asian bard this question, for he had contributed several hundred tales to an ethnographic mission. He said, "This is one thing I was never asked by the learned men and women." His explanation of the function of this tale, The Food of Paradise, is that it will confirm the bias of those who, for example, believe that humility is really living off the byproducts of a total system. It will also, he continued, encourage those who think that even those things which seem wonderful, the sweetmeat, are as nothing, seen from a wider perspective. But, he continued, for those who are ready to understand the truth, they will find this tale valuable to take them beyond such simple confirmations. On the close of my visit to the holy city Mecca, I joined the caravan of Sheikh Amru, who, apart from being a great theological teacher, was a famous narrator of ancient tales. The occasion was when he asked me as to what calling I was going to choose after my wanderings. Somewhat humorously, I said that I was going to do nothing for my living, since Allah has promised to feed the faithful. "Listen, my son," said the sheikh, as he reclined against his camel's saddle, and then I knew that an ancient tale was to be retailed out to us. This is what he said. In the school founded by the Caliph for the study of divine things sat the devout Mullah Ibrahim, his hands folded in his lap, in an attitude of meditation. Ibrahim taught students from all the countries of Islam, but the work was thankless and ill-paid. And as he sat there, he thought on his state for the first time in many years. "Why is it," he said to himself, "that a man so holy as I am must toil so hard to instruct a pack of blockheads, when others who have merited nothing through piety or attentions to the commands of Allah fare sumptuously every day and neither toil nor spin? O compassionate one, is not this thing unjust? Whereof should thy servant be burdened like an ass in the marketplace, which carries 2 panniers, both filled to the top, and stumbles at every blow of the driver's stick?" And as he considered, Ibrahim the Wise, as men called him, brought to mind that verse in the holy literature in which it says, "Allah will not let anyone starve." And taking deeper counsel with himself, he said, "May it not be that those whom I have blamed for their sloth and inactivity are, after all, the better Muslims, that they have greater faith than I? For, perusing this passage, they may have said to themselves, 'I will cast myself upon the mercy of Allah,' which in this text is surely extended to all men. Allah in His bounty will surely feed and maintain me. Why then toil and strive as the faithless do? It is those who have faith that are the elect." At that moment a great pasha halted before the gates of the seminary, in his piety alighting from his palanquin to give alms to a beggar, as all good Muslims do. And as Ibrahim watched him through the lattice, he thought, "Does not the condition of the beggar, as well as that of this pasha, prove the justice of the text upon which I have been meditating? Neither starves, but the wealthier man is assuredly the more devout, for he is the giver and not the receiver, and for this very purpose has been blessed with the goods of this world. Why do I hesitate, wretched man that I am? Shall I not, as the book ordains, cast myself on the bounty of Allah, and free myself forever from the intolerable burden of instructing fools in a wisdom they can never understand?" So saying, Ibrahim the sage arose from his place in the college of the Caliph, and walked out of the city of Baghdad, where he had dwelt for many years. It was evening, and betaking himself to the banks of the river, he selected a dry and shady spot beneath a spreading cypress tree, and awaiting the bounty of Allah, fell fast asleep in the certainty that the Lord of all compassion would not fail him. When he awoke, it was early morning, and a divine hush lay upon everything. Ibrahim lazily speculated as to the manner in which he would be sustained. Would the birds of the air bring him sustenance? Would the fishes from the stream leap ashore, offering themselves for the assuagement of his growing hunger? In what way did those who merited the help of Allah first receive it, if not in some miraculous manner? True, the wealthy were bequeathed riches by their parents, but there must be a beginning. A pasha might sail down the river in his barge and supply his wants out of golden dishes and silver cups. But morning blossomed into day, and day into night, and still the miracle remained unaccomplished. More than one pasha glided past him in his gilded barge, but these made only the customary salutations and gave no other sign. On the road above, pilgrims and travellers passed, but without taking the least notice of him. Hunger gnawed at his vitals, and he thought with envy of the millet porridge with goat's milk which the mullahs would now be enjoying at the seminary. Still was he trustful, and as he made the customary ablutions in the river, his faith had abated not one jot. Again he slept, and once more day dawned in scarlet and silver beauty. By this time he felt so faint as scarcely to be able to stand. The hours crept slowly onward, yet no sign came that his hunger was to be satisfied. At last, as midday approached with its stifling heat, something floating on the surface of the water caught his eye. It seemed like a mass of leaves wrapped up with fibre, and wading into the river he succeeded in catching it. Back he splashed with his prize to the bank, and sitting down on the sward he opened the packet. It contained a quantity of the most delicious-looking halva, that famous marzipan, of whose making only Baghdad knows the secret, a sweetmeat composed of sugar mingled with paste of almonds and attar of roses and other delicate and savoury essences. After gorging himself with the delightful fare, Ibrahim the wise drank deeply from the river and lolled on the grass, sure that his prayer had been answered, and that he would never have to toil more. There was sufficient of the ambrosial food to serve for 3 meals a day, and on each day, after the hour of midday prayer, a similar packet of halva came floating down the stream, as though placed there by the hands of angels. "Surely," said the mullah, "the promises of Allah are true, and the man who trusts in him will not be deceived. Truly I did well to leave the seminary, where day in, day out, I had perforce to cram divine knowledge into the heads of idiots, incapable of repeating a verse correctly, even at the 15th attempt." Months passed, and Ibrahim continued to receive the food that Allah had promised with unfailing regularity. Then, quite naturally, he began to speculate whence it came. If he could find the spot where it was deposited on the surface of the stream, surely he must witness a miracle, and as he had never done so, he felt greatly desirous of attaining the merit such a consummation would undoubtedly add to his repute as a holy man. So one morning, after eating the last of the halva he had received the preceding day, he girded up his loins, and taking his staff, began slowly to walk upstream. "Now," said he, "if what I suppose be true, I will today receive my luscious food at an earlier hour than usual, as I shall be nearer the place where it is placed on the water, and indeed on each day I shall receive at an even earlier hour, until at last I come to the spot where some divine seraph, sent by Allah from paradise, drops the savoury food of heaven upon the stream in justification of my trust in the Most Merciful." For some days Ibrahim walked upstream, keeping carefully to the bank of the river, and fixing his eyes on its surface in case he should fail to discern the packet of halva. Every day, at an even earlier hour, it floated regularly past him, carried by the current so near to the shore that he could easily wade out and secure it. At nights he slept beneath a convenient tree, and as men perceived him to be a mullah and a holy man, no one thought of molesting him. It was on the 4th day of his journey that he observed the river had widened. On a large island in the midst of the stream rose a fair castle. The island comprised a princely domain of noble meadowland and rich gardens, crossed and interlaced by the silver of narrow streams, and was backed by the blue and jagged peaks of great mountains. The castle itself was built of marble white as sculptured ice, and its green and shady lawns, sloped down to a silent and extensive shore of golden sand. and when night descended, this wondrous region was illuminated by the romance of moonlight into an almost unearthly radiance, so that Ibrahim, in all his piety, was forced to compare it with paradise itself. The white castle on its dark rocks seemed like day pedestaled upon night, and from the sea green of the shadow of myrtles rose the peaks of pavilions, whence came the sound of guitars and lutes, and voices more ravishingly sweet than Ibrahim, the son of the seminary, had ever believed earth could hold. And as Ibrahim gazed spellbound at the wondrous spectacle, and drank in the sounds of ecstasy which arose from the garden, wondering whether he were not already dead and in the purlieus of heaven, a harsh voice hailed him at his very elbow, asking him what he was doing there. He turned swiftly to see standing beside him an ancient man in the garb of a hermit, with long matted hair and tangled beard. "Salam, good father," he said, much relieved, for like all men of peace, he feared violence. "The peace of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, be upon you." "And upon you, my son," replied the anchorite. "But what do you do here at this hour of the night, when all such as you should be asleep?" "Like yourself, I am a holy man," replied Ibrahim with unction, "but I travel on a quest, the nature of which I may not divulge to any. Passing this spot, I was attracted by the unusual appearance of yonder castle and its surroundings, and would learn its history, if that is known to you." "It is, though in part only," rejoined the hermit, "for I have dwelt many years in this neighbourhood, but have little converse with men. Know, then, that the place you behold is called the Silver Castle. It was built by a pasha now dead, who was greatly enamoured of a certain princess, whose father refused him her hand in marriage. But not to be gainsaid, so fierce and unruly a thing is love in some men, he built this strength in the midst of the river, as you see, and placed upon it so many dark and terrible spells of magic that none could cross to it or from it without his sanction. Then, abducting the princess, he espoused her and placed her in yonder tower. The king, her father, came with an army to besiege the palace, but so potent were the necromancies the pasha had surrounded it with, that he was compelled to raise the siege and leave his daughter in the hands of his enemy." "You amaze me," cried Ibrahim. "And does this princess remain here still?" "No, brother," replied the hermit. "Like her lord, she has passed away, but they have left behind them a daughter who governs the castle, a lady of surpassing beauty, who spends her days in pleasure and in spending the wealth her father bequeathed her. But she has but one sorrow, and that is that none can dissolve the spells woven by her father the pasha, so that no one may either gain admittance to the castle or leave it. Her companions are therefore either the very aged or those born on the island, and no other, which, for a young and beautiful woman, must be wearisome. But you will pardon me, brother, I am going on a pilgrimage to a certain shrine in Baghdad, where I betake myself once a year to acquire merit. Meanwhile, if you choose to rest, you may dwell in my humble cell yonder until I return in 7 days' time." Ibrahim gladly accepted the hermit's offer, and when he had gone, sat down to ponder over the tale he had told him. Now, among other wisdoms, he had acquired during his years of study a deep knowledge of the magical art, and he bethought him that it might be given to him to rid the castle and the inhabitants of the spells which held them prisoner on the island. But in the midst of his thoughts he fell asleep, and did not waken until the sun was high in the heavens. Then he made his ablutions, and betook himself to the bank of the river, where he sat and watched the surface of the water for a sign of the appearance of the delicious food he received daily. And as he watched, he beheld a curious thing. Some 3 hours before midday, a very beautiful woman appeared on the marble battlements which overhung the river. So fair was she that the mullah gasped with surprise at the radiance of her beauty, which was that of the houris of paradise. For her hair was as golden wire which is drawn thin by the cunning of the goldsmith. Her eyes were yellow and bright as topazes found on Mount Ararat, and the colour of her cheeks was as that of the roses of Isfahan. And as for the flesh of her body, it shone with the lustre of silver, so brightly polished it was. "Can this be the princess?" thought Ibrahim, "or an angel from heaven? Nay, surely it is she, for this woman, though surpassingly beautiful, is still a mortal." And as Ibrahim stood beholding her, she raised her arm and cast something into the river. And when she had done so, she withdrew from the battlements and disappeared like a star behind clouds. The mullah kept his eyes fixed on what she had cast into the stream, and in a little perceived that it was the very packet of leaves which he was wont to receive daily. Wading into the stream, he secured it, unwrapped it, and found it full of the delicious halva as usual. "Ha!" said he, as he devoured the savoury sweetmeat. "So now I know at last that radiant being by whose hands Allah, the just, the merciful, has ordained I shall be fed daily. Truly the compassionate must have put it into the heart of this divine princess to cast this luscious food on the breast of the stream at the self-same hour each day. And shall I not seek to repay her the distinguished kindness she has done me, by freeing her from the spells by which she is encompassed, and which keep her a prisoner, she who would be wed to a sultan at least, and should reign in Baghdad itself?" And with these grateful thoughts, he sat down to consider by what means the spells which surrounded the castle might be broken. Casting himself into a deep trance, he walked in spirit in the land of the jinn, where as a holy man he could come to no harm. And coming to the house of one of the jinn, whom he knew and whose name was Adhem, he summoned him and had speech with him. "Hail, holy man," said Adhem, making low obeisance. "I am your servant. In what way can I serve you?" Ibrahim acquainted him with the reason for his presence there, at which the jinn assumed an air of the greatest concern. "What you ask is indeed hard, most wise Ibrahim," he said doubtfully. "But I will take counsel of my brethren on the matter without delay, and shall let you know the result of our deliberations by a speedy and trusty messenger. No more can I say or do at present." With this Ibrahim departed, and soon after awoke from his trance. He seemed only to have been an hour in the land of the jinn, but it must have been 5 hours or more, for the sun was high in the heavens when he fell asleep, and now the moonlight was sparkling on the waters of the river. And the same exquisite music he had heard before arose from the gardens of the castle, as though from the lips of Peris. And as Ibrahim listened, entranced, a shape scarcely more solid than the moonlight rose slowly out of the river, and stood before him in the shadowy likeness of a jinn. 3 times it made obeisance before him, then it spoke. "Most wise and holy Ibrahim," it said, "my master Adhem, a prince among the people of the jinn, has sent me to acquaint you with the decision of his counselors. They proffer you this ring set with the diamond which men call adamant, and in whose shining surface, if you will gaze, you shall behold the nature of those spells which keep the princess and her people prisoners in yonder castle. And having discovered the nature of those spells, if you summon our people to your aid in such shapes as will dissolve or break them, they will come in such guise as will set the princess free." With those words the jinn vanished into the river whence he had come. And without delay, Ibrahim took the ring which the spirit had cast on the grass at his feet, and peered into the shining stone it held. And straightway he beheld the first spell. Close to the shore of the river arose a mighty bastion as of stone, invisible to mortal eyes, which surrounded the castle from shore to shore. And Ibrahim summoned to him the hosts of the jinns in the guise of sappers, with picks and hammers, and on this wall they fell mightily in their myriads, so that without sound or clamour of any sort, they reduced it to dust ere a man could count 100. Then Ibrahim looked once more in the surface of the diamond, and saw a great web like that of a spider hanging in the air round the castle. And he summoned the hosts of the jinn in the shape of eagles, which so rent the invisible web with their strong beaks, that in almost less time than it takes to tell of it, it fell in fragments into the stream. Once more Ibrahim gazed into the stone, and this time he saw an army of sightless giants, with spear and scimitar in hand, drawn up in array of war on the shores of the island. And he called the jinn people to him in the likeness of greater and more powerful giants, who did battle with those on the island. Terrible was the strife, and Ibrahim trembled mightily as he watched it. But soon the jinn prevailed over the giants of the island and put them to flight. The spells which had surrounded the castle were now removed, and as day had dawned, Ibrahim cast about for some means of reaching the castle. No sooner had he wished this than by the power of the jinn a bridge rose out of the stream by which he was enabled to cross to the island. And when he had done so, he was accosted by an old man who held a bared scimitar in his hand, and who asked him by what means he had been enabled to reach the island, which had so long been under enchantment. "That I may tell only to your lady the princess," said Ibrahim. "Admit me to her presence without delay." The guard, marvelling, ushered him through the great gate of the castle and across a spacious court where fountains sang mellifluously. Entering a magnificent hall, whose floor was inlaid with squares of blue and white marble, and the walls with lapis lazuli and other rare stones, he gave the mullah into the keeping of a black eunuch, who requested the holy man to follow him. Upon a dais sat the incomparable princess whom Ibrahim had beheld on the battlements, and who daily cast the packet of halva on the waters of the river. To her the mullah made obeisance, and kneeling before her, told his tale. "And what, most wise Ibrahim, do you ask in recompense of your so notable offices on my behalf?" asked the princess. "Speak, and it shall be granted to you, even to half of my inheritance." "Nay, noble lady," exclaimed Ibrahim, "for have I not reason enough to be grateful to your highness for the delicious food with which you have fed me daily? That halva which you cast every morning from the battlements, and which has floated downstream, I have eaten with thankfulness. Surely only an angel from paradise could have put it into your heart to dispatch it." The princess blushed so deeply that her heightened colour could be seen even beneath her veil. "Alas, good mullah!" she cried, wringing her hands. "What is this you tell me? Curses on the day on which I first cast that halva, as you call it, on the waters of the river. Know that each morning it is my custom to take a bath of milk, after which I anoint and rub my limbs with essence of almonds, sugar, and sweet-scented cosmetics. These, then, I remove from my nakedness, and, wrapping them in leaves, cast them into the stream." "Ah, now, princess, I see who has been blind," cried Ibrahim with a wry countenance. "Allah surely gives food to everyone, but its quality and kind are dictated by what man deserves."